Good evening, everybody, and a very, very warm welcome to us tonight on Zoom. Thank you so much for joining us, wherever it is you are joining us from. My name is Hilary Nichols, and I am part of the staff at Grace Church Highlands, which is in North London. And we're so glad tonight that you've joined us for a very special event with our guest tonight, Jeremy Marshall, who is currently in Kent, and we'll be getting to know him very shortly. But just before we go on to that part of the evening, I just wanted to say a few things. The first is that we are going to be looking tonight at the issue of hope in the face of death, hope in the face of suffering. And we're very aware, not just because it's COVID, but in normal life for everyone, there are times when we all go through different sufferings, different situations. And we're aware that this might be a difficult topic for some people tonight. So we just wanted to say that if we can support you at Grace Church in any way with anything that comes out of this evening, please do get in touch. You can contact us via our website. We'll be giving details of that shortly. Or you can contact us via the chat tonight at Grace Church Highlands. And that's also the place where you can contact us tonight for questions. Just so you know the plan for the evening, we're going to be interviewing Jeremy for about 20-25 minutes, something like that. And Jeremy's very keen that people feel that they can ask any question that they would like tonight, hopefully on topics related to the subject, not top tips for homeschooling or what he thinks is happening in the football, although I'm sure he's got lots to say on that, being a Watford supporter. But yes, tonight, if you would like to ask us any questions, we're going to provide various means for you to do that. There'll be the chat facility on Zoom, which some of you may be familiar with. If you're not, if you look down at the bottom of the screen, you'll find the chat function there. If you're on a phone, I think it's at the bottom of your screen. And if you're on an iPhone, I think it's 3 dots at the top. But hopefully you can find the chat feature. If not, we'll be providing a link via Pigeonhole, a website that you can contact and ask us your questions anonymously if you'd like to remain anonymous, but you don't have to. If you'd like to make yourself known, please do. So yeah, that will be about another 20 minutes, and we're hoping to finish within the hour, so that it's not too Zoom heavy tonight for you all at the end of the week. But please do feel free during the interview, if questions crop up from what Jeremy's saying, do put them in there as you go along. We'll be collating them and grouping similar questions together. Yes, and then there'll be time afterwards, and if questions occur to you as we're asking other questions, then please do get in touch. And as I said, if you need any other support, Grace Church is here, and we'd love to hear from you if there's anything else that tonight brings up for you that you might feel we can support you in. We will try and get through as many of your questions as we can. We can't guarantee to get through every single one, but again, if your question doesn't get answered, please do contact us, and we can either forward it on to Jeremy or we'll try and answer it ourselves. So I think without further ado, it's time to get started. Let's introduce our guest tonight, Jeremy. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Oh, pleasure, Hilary. Thanks for having me. Yeah. We
feel very honoured that you've given up your time this evening, and just tell us what
it's been a huge commitment to walk from my kitchen. Yeah, 10 feet.
Yeah, we're getting used to meetings from our armchairs, which often have their advantages. But where are you in the country at the moment, Jeremy?
Yeah, so just really around the opposite side of the M25 in Sevenoaks. I'm married to Jeanette. We've got 3 adult children. And I grew up actually not far from you, hence the Watford connection, right? Several people said to me, why on earth do you want to support Watford? Don't you have enough suffering in your life without adding to it voluntarily? Almost exactly a year ago, actually, just before lockdown, I've got 2 books. One of them's this one, Beyond the Big Sea. And they actually interviewed me at half time in a Premier League match at Vicarage Road about the book and about the Christian faith. And after that, a miracle happened. Watford won the match.
God is at work. If you needed evidence tonight, there it is. Yeah, we're sure that this issue will bring up lots of questions for people, though. So we know that for many people, it can be something that holds them back from considering God. The link between God and suffering is often a tricky one for people. But we'll be moving on to that. First of all, Jeremy, just tell us, how has lockdown been for you? Does it feel like it's dragging on forever?
Yeah, I guess it does, and I think, Hilary, it does for everyone. It's been particularly difficult for me because I have a very weak immune system. So for most of lockdown, I've been in chemotherapy, And in fact, I've been in chemotherapy for the last 6 years. Well, I'll give you all the gory medical details in a minute. I've also been in hospital with a serious heart condition in lockdown as well. Actually, not too far from where you are in Harefield, just a bit round. And that was really strange to be kind of locked in a room, basically in a hospital where you couldn't go out. What I'd say to everybody watching, and I'd say this in a really friendly way, is in a strange way, welcome to my world, because as you'll be hearing, I've been living with this incurable cancer for 6 years, and for another 2-3 years before that, I had cancer as well. So every time someone coughed or sneezed in the last 6 years, I was afraid, and now we all feel like that. And in that same period, I was living, if you like, with the sword of Damocles over my head. You know, how long have I got to live? Every 2 months, in fact, this time last week, I went to the hospital at the Marsden. I had a scan, and then they called me on Monday with the results, and they were good. Sometimes they're not so good. So this sort of sense of living, under death's shadow is something that I've been living with for ages, and now tragically we're all living with that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Challenges abound for sure. Just perhaps you could tell us a bit about your working life. I believe you used to be in banking. Tell us a bit about how that was. Gets a bad press, banking, doesn't it? But
it does, I'm afraid so. Yeah.
Tell us about what your role was, what you liked about it.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not a naturally religious person, right? I'm a banker. They don't get more kind of negative or evil than that. So my last job was I was chief executive of a very old, typically British family-owned bank called Seahor & Co, which, if any of you have heard of, it's 350 years old, still owned by the same family, been on the same site in Fleet Street since 1690. If anybody watching has been to Stourhead in Wiltshire, that's the family home. And it was an absolutely fantastic job. Yeah, and the family was such fun. They're on the 12th generation, amazing people, really great fun. It was kind of my dream job. And the offices are to die for. They're kind of hidden away in Fleet Street, but there's, old masters and courtyards with fountains. Before that, I was also in banking. One thing I learned was that dealing with wealthy people, money doesn't make you happy. But that's what a lot, maybe where you are is different, Hilary, but in Sevenoaks anyway, a lot of people are very driven. And driven to make money and driven to succeed. But having worked with some of the wealthiest people in the world, having money doesn't make you happy. In fact, some of the most miserable people I've ever met have been very wealthy people. Jim Carrey, the actor, said, I wish everyone could have their dreams come true so that they could see that having their dreams come true doesn't make them happy. And that was my experience of dealing with really wealthy people.
That's really interesting. And, the same is true, isn't it, for the celebrity culture? I think many people feel they're working their way up the ladder. And I mean, social media now is such a big thing, getting likes and followings and influence. And actually, many are finding that it doesn't provide the satisfaction that they were hoping for. So one day, a number of years ago, is it 8 years ago now? Something happened. And your life changed. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, and Hilary, I guess maybe a lot of people watching have been through something like that. So just over 8 years ago, I found a lump on my ribs one morning, and my wife told me, get it checked out. Thank God she did. Go to the GP, who said, oh, it's just a fatty lump. It's nothing to worry about, but we'll get it checked out. And then maybe some of you have been through that. You get referred from hospital to hospital. In the end, I got referred to the Marsden, which only does one thing, right, which is cancer. And they told me you got this really rare type of cancer. It's a type of sarcoma. There are many, many different types of cancer. Sarcoma are cancers of the muscle tissue. And there are 150 subtypes, and you've got this one, but we caught it early and we should be able to treat you. So I went through treatment for about 6 months. And then for 2 years, everything went back to normal. I felt maybe like sometimes when you're driving, a lorry thunders by the other way and you thought, oh, that was really close, and your kind of life flashes before you. But then after a bit, you forget it. And then 5.5 years ago, I was at a friend's house here in Sevenoaks, just having dinner one evening, and I went to adjust my collar right here. And as I did that, I felt a massive lump on the collarbone, not a tiny pea, but like a golf ball.
Yeah.
And within a few seconds, my life changed. I felt sick to the stomach. I knew right away what it was. I said, I'm sorry, I feel ill. I need to go home. Went back to the hospital. I was sitting in the waiting room with my wife. They'd run tests in the meantime. The nurse said, please come through. I walked down a little corridor, And on the way, she said, "I'm really, really sorry." And that was the only warning I had, because when I went into the room, there were lots of people there, which is never a good sign. And they said, "Look, you've got tumors everywhere. We don't know how we've missed this." In fact, a year later, they discovered it was a completely different, also very rare type of cancer. So they were looking in one area of cancer, and it was another one. But unlike the first time, there's not really a great deal we can do. And of course, the question you ask is, well, how long do you think I've got? And doctors rightly say, well, never exactly know, but after a bit they said, well, 18 months. So at that I burst into tears. And please don't think I'm some kind of super cancer expert or religious person. I already mentioned I'm a banker, right? It's really hard to have cancer, really hard. The hardest thing is the impact it has on your family. And I'm like a walking one-man medical disaster. I was never in a hospital till I was 50, and I've never been out of it since. So I've had 30 chemotherapies, dozen operations. I was blind for a while. I lost the sight in both eyes. I got it back in one. And then I had this serious heart issue, which was maybe related to COVID. So if you read about NHS crisis, I'm the person mainly responsible. The thing that I found amazing in living with cancer is the presence of God. And I've been through some really dark places and very unpleasant experiences, but I remember the promises of God. I'll never leave you or forsake you. Or Jesus said, "Look, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age." Or maybe the most famous chapter in the Bible is the 23rd Psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd." And it goes on to say, "Yes, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you're with me." And that's been my experience. And being a Christian isn't about you're near the M25, as already right. There's no M25 around death, right? We all must go through the valley of the shadow of death. God doesn't promise us a bypass. He promises us something more amazing, which is in the face of death, he promises us his presence. And we're all, aren't we, sadly, in that valley of the shadow of death now. We hear every day, 900, 1,200, the terrible roll call of people dying. And yet I found that makes all the difference. It gives me hope in the face of death to know that there is a God and my times are in his hand.
Thank you so much for talking about that. I mean, death isn't something that we naturally, as British people, tend to bring up day to day, but it's a real issue, and it's become more real for us, as you say, with the presence of COVID. But for you, it's something that you are living with every day. And obviously, the promises of God have been really important to you. Would you describe, if you had to describe your identity, would you say your identity comes from being a family man or a banker? Or something else?
I think all of those things are important. And when you're really ill, I don't miss work. Nobody on their deathbed says, "I wish I'd spend more time in the office." But I absolutely adore spending time with my family. I would say, Hilary, that the thing that I feel more than anything is fear. So if you're with your family or watching Watford or whatever it is, that takes your mind off things maybe for a while, but it's not the ultimate answer. So I find the ultimate answer to fear is God himself, and that the trust I have in him, that the trust I place in his hands gives me hope, because humanly speaking, it's incurable, right? It's going to get me sooner or later. But if you don't mind me saying so, something's going to get all of us sooner or later, right? Maybe I'm just a bit further on. So I find that amazing. I find that makes all the difference to have a hope, have an answer to death. Now, I realize that's a huge claim.
I was going to say that's a big thing.
If you're skeptical about it, please push back afterwards. I am claiming there's an answer to death. It's not about me. It's as if I'm actually getting my vaccine on Monday, which I'm really excited about. Right. And being a Christian is like someone's giving you a vaccine, not for COVID, but for death. We didn't do anything to invent it. We didn't do anything to manufacture it. We didn't do anything to get it. We just let the person put it in our arm. And that's what being a Christian is, having a vaccine for death.
So that sounds like something more that happens to you. So, I mean, you were talking about trusting in the promises of God. And I suppose one question that we might be thinking is, how do you know those promises are trustworthy and true. So that's one side of it. But then also, you know, you're saying it's almost just like receiving a vaccine. How do those two things work together?
Yeah, I think being a Christian is not about being religious or going to church. It's about meeting a person, Jesus Christ, who claims he has the answer to death. In the Bible, Jesus says, I have the keys of death and hell. If you have the keys to something, you usually own it, right? A house or a car. So that's the Christian claim, that this man, Jesus Christ, who Christians believe is fully human and fully God, holds the keys to death. And that longing for that answer, Hilary, is really powerful. So Eddie Izzard, the transvestite comedian, said recently in an interview, all my life I've been traumatized by the death of my mother when I, Eddie, was 6 or 7. If only she or someone had come back through the clouds to tell us there's something there beyond the grave, is what he meant. And I couldn't have put it better myself. That is the Christian claim, right? Yeah.
And if that's not true, then you might as well give up on Christianity, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It stands or falls on that. I mean, that's just such a massive claim to make, that Jesus overcome death by rising from the dead. Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be questions about that as well later on. But for many people, another big question would be, you know, God is loving. He cares about us as individuals. You know, you've talked about his presence with you and in a very personal way. But for many people, there's an issue of reconciling this loving God with someone who would allow the big C, whether that be cancer or COVID. Yeah, why doesn't he do something about it? What would you say to that?
That's a great question, Hilary, and I'd say that's the most common question that people ask Christians, and that's great. I love it when people ask questions, please. So in the beginning, the Bible tells us everything was good when God made the universe, and that's the God we're telling you about, a God who's infinitely big. The universe is 75 trillion light years across. Christian claim is God holds that, and he made it good. But yet, if we look at the world around us, what do we see? We don't see good. We see some good. We see Captain Tom and other people like that, but we see a lot of evil. We see evil, natural evil, like cancer and coronavirus. We see evil in other people, don't we, when we look at the news? But also, if we're honest, when we look in the mirror, we have to say there's also evil within each one of us, things that each one of us have done that we're embarrassed and ashamed about. The Russian dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, the line between good and evil doesn't run between countries, doesn't run between political parties, it doesn't even run between individuals, it runs right down the middle of each one of us. So the Christian claim is that evil entered the world, and also evil entered each one of us. So why doesn't God do something about it? Well, that's the very big Christian claim, that God exactly did do something about it. What did he do? Well, 2,000 years ago, in an obscure corner of the Roman Empire, the eternal creator God who made the universe became a human being, a helpless human being. And that human being grew up and lived and taught like nobody has ever lived or taught since. I mean, if you want to spark a crowd, not that they're allowed now, but if you want to start a crowd in your church, I don't know if you have a graveyard. I guess you're in a school, you don't have a graveyard, but lots of churches have graveyards, right? Try this experiment. Say at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, I'll be raising the dead from the cemetery. You'll get a crowd, I guarantee you. But that's what Jesus did. Yeah. In front of hundreds of people, he called out people, come back by name, and they came back from the dead. And more than that Jesus experienced suffering. So in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he was arrested, he could see the soldiers coming to arrest him. And he was afraid. He said, Father, if it's your will, take this cup away from me, by which he meant the cup of suffering. But let not my will, but your will be done. So Jesus, Christians believe, is perfect. He didn't have to die, but yet he came to die. Well, why? Because Christians believe that there's an abyss, if you like, between us and God, a chasm. And that chasm is all the things that we've done wrong. But God throws down a bridge, and he throws down a bridge by sending his son into the world to die, and invites us to cross over if we trust in Jesus's death on the cross. So Christians believe that the only way back to God, the only way to cross that chasm, is on the cross, where Jesus took all the things that we've done wrong and paid the bill for that. And what motivated him to do that? Love. Love for us. Love for these poor, screwed up, lost, troubled people. God could have justifiably said, oh, that experiment didn't work. No, he didn't do that. He loved us so much. That's what the Bible said. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, should not be separated from God, but should have eternal life. A man called Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German pastor who stood up against the persecution of the Jews, sent to a concentration camp and was executed. But just before he died, he smuggled out of his cell a little piece of paper, and on it written this: only a suffering God can help us. Only a suffering God can help us. That's the Christian claim, that the God, the eternal creator God, because he became a human being, could suffer and chose to suffer and suffered because he loves us and wants to rescue us from the mess we're in.
That's so helpful. So you're really describing God as somebody who has all power and came into the world in human flesh and demonstrated compassion. So those two qualities of supreme sovereignty and power and compassion is a wonderful combination to hear about. But I guess for many of us, it might be a new idea to think about God coming in that way. And as you said, making a bridge and dealing with this chasm is so much to get our heads around. But what would you say, I mean, comparing Christianity to other religions, what would you say sets this God apart from other deities, you know, holding that? What would happen if we just had the power or just had the compassion? Where would we be left?
Well, I think if you want to understand what's distinctive about Christianity, then look at Christ, right? And if you want to understand the God who made the universe, which none of us can see, then 2,000 years ago, that God became a human being. Now, maybe the next question is, well, okay, well, how do we know then what happened 2,000 years ago? Because we have 4 eyewitness accounts. That's what the Gospels are. And that's what I'd invite you, to have a look at. If you're watching this and you're a bit skeptical about what I'm saying, and I understand they're big claims, I understand that. I was skeptical when I started. Have a look, right? What I'm and Hillary and any Christian can offer you and do offer you is life, right? Choose life. That's what Jesus says. He stands in front of a grieving sister whose brother's just died, and he says, "I'm the resurrection and I'm the life. Do you believe? Do you believe?" And when he says belief, we tend to think of kind of intellectual assent, but there's more than that. It's becoming a Christian is trust. Yeah, okay, I do believe, even though I have doubts. We all have doubts. Please ask me about that if you like. So the centerpiece of Christianity, the thing that's unique about Christianity, is Jesus Christ.
And would you have any recommendations about how people, I mean, I don't know what your path was exactly before your diagnosis to coming to Christianity and putting your faith in that God, but yeah, what sort of next steps would you recommend for people if they were thinking, oh, this sounds really quite interesting, I'd like to follow this up?
Look, people are often skeptical, and I completely understand that. And often people also say, well, if I were in your position, Jeremy, I'd probably feel the same, right? What have you got to lose? I would suggest there's 2 broad schools of thought, right? I appreciate there are more than that. And if you say I'm in neither school of thought, that's okay. Please ask me a question. But one school of thought is, ably developed by the best friend the church ever had, which is Richard Dawkins, right? And I mean that seriously, because Dawkins actually is logical and follows his ideas clearly. And what he says is, there is no God, there is no purpose. What does the universe say to us? The universe has nothing to say to us except blind, pitiless indifference. Blind, pitiless indifference. That's the Dawkins view. There's no meaning to anything. There's no meaning to death. Death severs everything. Death is just the end. All the loves and happiness we've had is all meaningless. Now, the Christian view, which I happen to prefer, and I guess it's obvious, is rather different, right? That there is a God who loves us, who doesn't want anyone to go away from him, but wants all to come home. But the question is not which is more helpful in the face of death or COVID, which I guess is kind of rather obvious. It's which is true, right? That's why I'm a Christian, because I believe it's true. It's only helpful if it's true. It's only helpful if it's true. Otherwise, it's a con trick. So why do I believe it's true? And I came to this over a process of time, and I'd invite you, take the same steps. Because I believe if you went back with an iPhone on on the morning of Easter Sunday, AD 34 or 35, the things that the 4 eyewitness accounts say happened, that the stone was rolled away, that Jesus had been dead for 3 days, came back to life and was seen by many, many people, even 500 people at once. This wasn't some ghost. No, he was touched. He ate food. People could converse with him over a long, long period of time. See, Christianity stands or falls on whether that's true.
Sure.
If Jesus didn't come back physically, bodily from the dead, then it's not true. It's a con trick. But if he did, and that's what billions of people in the world believe, then that makes all the difference. That's more important than anything, more important than when you get the vaccine, because Jesus stands in front of you, if you like, blocking the way to death, not just physical death, but eternal death, separation from God, and says, I have the keys of death and hell. So being a Christian is about what happened 2,000 years ago. It's also about what happens now. It makes all the difference to me, facing death, to know the presence of Jesus Christ. And it's also about the future, because the last verse of the 23rd Psalm is this: surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Wow. So being a Christian, where are we going? We're going home, to the place we're meant for, by the way. You will never find happiness anywhere else than the God for whom you were designed. A man called Augustine said this: you, God, have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until we find rest in you. So that's the Christian invitation. Come home to the Father. Stop wandering off. Stop rebelling against God. Come home. And what do you need to do? Nothing. Like the boy and the prodigal son, you just need to come home. You don't need to be good. You don't need to follow rules. You just need to come home. Come home to the Father. And how do we get to the Father? Through the Son. And what's the Son like? Just as you said, Hilary. He's full of compassion and love and kindness. Never was there anyone who was so kindly to the sick and the dying. And he's full of power, the power to defeat death.
Thank you so much for sharing, your own very personal relationship with him. And I think, you would say yourself that there's nothing to lose by, although for many of you it might be an investment to spend time looking at the eyewitness accounts if you haven't done so. And there is nothing to lose by doing that, right? So are there any ways that you think are helpful for doing that, for looking at these eyewitness accounts? And yeah,
just be as skeptical as you like. Get a Christian friend and just have a chat with them about it. I'm not asking you to go to church. You actually can't go to church now anyway. So yeah, if you have a Christian friend, just say, okay, all right, I'm willing to I'll give you half an hour, and I'll kick the tires, right? I'll have a look. And if you haven't got a Christian friend, I'm sure someone in the church can find you someone.
Yeah, you can. So
we'd love to, not because we don't think we're better than you. We don't think we're good. No, we're these people who have found a vaccine, the answer to death, and we want to share it.
Yeah, and I guess, we can walk each other home, like you said. It's home where we're heading. And Grace Church has a number of ways as well, which you can follow up with. So we do have a regular group that's part of a worldwide course called Christianity Explored, which gives you the opportunity to come and look at one of these eyewitness accounts and ask any questions you have. There is no questions barred. For some of you may not want a formal course, and as Jeremy said, you might prefer to do things one-to-one. Just a couple of things that we have at Grace Church available to you. We have copies of John's Gospel available, and we'll be sharing links on how you can get hold of one of these. Just contact us if you'd like one of these, and you can have your own opportunity to look through John's Gospel either on your own, or contact us if you'd like to do that with some help from someone else. One thing that Jeremy referred to is his books. You have 2 books, I believe, Jeremy. You're too modest to tell us. I hope hope you've got the other one there to show, because I've only got.
Funny enough, Hilary, I do. Here it is. Yeah, the second one is called "Hope in the Face of Suffering." So,
do you want to just do a little plug for us, Jeremy? Tell us.
Yeah, tragically, I don't get any royalties. What an idiot! I should have asked. Yeah, the first one is kind of my story of what it's like living with cancer, and how I found Jesus Christ to be amazing in the face of death. And the second one is 20 stories from the Bible I found amazingly helpful. I find the Bible like medicine, and both books are very short. They're about 15,000 words, and the chapters, they're just 2 pages a chapter. So again, what have you got to lose, right? We could read both books in an hour easily.
And actually, even better than that, we've provided a way for you to not even have to part with any money to get hold of these books. I mean, you will get the money if there is any money coming your way, because we've made a link for you with the bookseller. And if you just go to the link that will be shared in the chat, then you can receive one of these. You just need to pop your address in. You're not going to be hassled with lots of mailing lists and various other bits of information from the bookseller. But we'd love you to have a copy of this as a reminder of tonight, and to follow up a bit more. Goes into a bit more depth, doesn't it, Jeremy? The book on your story, and it's a fantastic read and a great book to give away to anyone as well who, is struggling with these issues and looking for some answers. So so this book and the other one, Hope and Suffering, are both available to you free of charge via the web link which we're sharing. So we want to say thank you for questions that have been coming in. I will just have a look and see what questions we've got here coming in, which live. So here's a question. Oh, sorry, I've just been corrected. Apparently, it's only this book that is available free. If you'd like the other book, then
you have to pay for it.
You have to pay for that one. So yeah, this one is free. So here's a question. When you get bad news or you have a bad day, Jeremy, and you feel afraid, what do you actually do?
Yeah, I quite often have bad days, and cancer's like a roller coaster. In fact, one of the articles in my new book is what's it like? It's like being on a roller coaster. We're going up and down. Sometimes you feel like, has God forgotten me? I feel that. Or God, what? I felt that recently. Why do you allow me to go through this? Now I remember a story from the Bible which I find amazingly helpful. So one day Jesus said to his disciples, let's go to the other side of the lake. So they get in the boat and off they sail, right? And that's me sailing along, sometimes up, sometimes down. But 2 things happen. Jesus goes to sleep and a tremendous storm blows up and the boat begins to sink. And then the disciples are terrified, and that's me in the hard times. And they become very doubting then of God, because in the end they shake Jesus away. Don't you care? We're going to drown. And that's like me in the storms of life, in the low points of cancer. What do I feel like? I feel like, yeah, has God forgotten me? Why, Lord, are you giving me this? I've got enough on my plate without giving me something extra as well. And that's like us, I think. And some people may even go one step further, which is, well, is there a God at all, right? So in the storms of life, I think all of us, 1, we may doubt if God exists, and 2, we may doubt, does God really care about us? Jesus then wakes up and he stills the storm immediately, and suddenly there's a dead calm, a mill pond, not a breath of wind, the sea completely flat. And then he says something really strange, which is, and then the disciples were even more afraid. They were more afraid in the mill pond than when they were drowning with the water pouring into the boat. Why? Because they remembered then who they had in the boat, right? So when I feel tough times, and I do, and I have in the last few months, to be honest, then I remember who's in my boat. And even though he may appear to be asleep, of course he's not really asleep. And if you're a Christian, you've got Christ in your boat. And if you're going through hard times, you can be sure of this. He will bring you to the other side of the lake, the other side of death.
Yeah.
And if you haven't got Christ in your boat, then get him in your boat, because he wants to get in. He invites himself into your boat. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. So what have you got to lose? Well, there is a certain cost in following Christ, right? Being a Christian also means being sorry for all the things we've done wrong. But the benefits of having Christ in your boat are so great. So what do I do when I feel down? I remember I've got Christ in my boat, even though he may appear to be asleep. Of course, he's not asleep.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's probably quite reassuring or helpful for people to understand that actually, just because you're a Christian and you've got this faith in God, you're not immune from feeling the same feelings that we as humanity generally, feel. You're not protected. And we'll come on to another question that's related to that in a moment. But I've got another question here. It says, thank you for your honesty in telling us about your fear. Have you also grappled with anger, for example, with the doctors who made mistakes, and with God for the suffering you and your family are experiencing now?
No, I honestly can say I never felt angry with God, but I did feel, yeah, kind of lost, if you like, or abandoned, as I said in the previous question. But if you do feel angry with God, that's okay.
Mm.
God's bigger than our emotions. There's a great story in the Bible, which also happens to be in my second book. And I put the things in the second book which I found helpful about a man called Job. Now, Job has terrible things happen to him, even worse than me. He then has these three friends who turn up to supposedly comfort him, and they're worse than useless. And Job becomes very angry angry with his friends and angry with God. And at the end of the book, God speaks to Job, and he does ask him the question, Job, are you God? Did you create the universe? And Job has to say, no, I repent. But he also says to his friends, you haven't spoken well of me as my servant Job has. So if you're angry with God, speak to God. If you're depressed, if you feel there is no God. And how do we speak to God? That's prayer, right? We don't need to go to a church, put our hands together, or assume some holy posture. And here's a great, here's a great prayer. God, I feel angry. Please speak to me. Or God, are you there? Please speak to me. God wants everyone to find him. And in fact, God is if you like, on everybody's case, I would say, to put it that way. The Bible says that God is patient, not wanting any to perish, but everyone to come to faith in him. So God is not playing hide and seek. God wants everyone to come to him. And if you're angry, come with your anger. If you're depressed, if you're doubting, come as you are. Come.
That's so helpful. Thank you. We've got a couple of questions related to death itself and the time around dying. This one is, do you ever think about what will happen when you die? And how do you think about that? And this one, which is related, what will you give thanks for when your final moment comes on earth?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, death is a solemn thing, isn't it? I like to throw in a few jokes in my talk, otherwise it can become a bit grim. But yeah, death is a solemn thing. I think the thing when I come to death is that, you know, if I used to live in Switzerland, and I'm not a mountain climber. I've got terrible vertigo, but I had friends who used to climb the Eiger and the Matterhorn and so on. And what would they do? They do it with a guide, right? Guide, and the guide was sure-footed because the guide had been up many, many times and knew exactly what he was. So the guide took them up to the top and brought them back down again, safe. So as a Christian, but that offers open to everyone. What do I feel about death? I feel I have a guide, right, who's been through death and come back. And more than that, who owns death. The Bible says that God will swallow up death. I just had a very nice crumble cooked by my dear mother, a blackberry and apple and ice cream, and we ate it and it was gone, right? The bowl was empty. Yeah. That's what the Bible says God is like. God will swallow death. God will do more than that. He will wipe away every tear. And what, as Christians, what happens when we die? We see God. We see God. We see Christ. And yeah, that will be amazing. But death is also a hard thing to go through. This is probably a stupid joke, but I'll make it anyway. You could compare death to going on a great holiday. None of us can go on holiday right now, but I've always kind of had slight hankering to go to the Seychelles or something. So we know that's an amazing destination, and to get there, that's heaven, right? You have to go through Heathrow Airport, right, which is death, right? Because it's kind of an unpleasant experience. And death, I've been, you know, at the bedside of several people dying, including my own father. And death is a terrible enemy. But the Christian claim is that Jesus has defeated death, and more than that, he's a guide who takes us through death and brings us to himself.
I think many people think about that other side of death as, you know, sort of sitting on a cloud playing a harp and you know, endless boredom of having to sit and worship God forever and ever. I mean, what do you think and wonder about eternity, and what do you think?
Funny enough, Hilary, on my blog, I just wrote if you go to my blog, JSJ Marshall Blogspot, I just wrote, what would it be like to be locked down with God for eternity, right?
Wow.
So yeah, what would it be? It will be amazing. Why? Because God is infinite. Two reasons why heaven, by the way, the Bible doesn't talk about clouds or St. Peter or harps or anything. The Bible says two things. God is infinite. You will never, never, never in infinity be able to know all about God. So there will always be more to discover. And what will it be like? It will be pleasure upon pleasure. And secondly, what will heaven be like? It will be going home. It will be going home. God has implanted in each one of us a desire for himself, and a desire for home. And the home that we're called to is God. and the anti-home is to reject God and go away from him. That's hell. What's hell? Hell is the absence of God, a place of judgment, a place where God is removed himself from it. So yeah, heaven will be amazing because God is infinite and God is love, and because we will be going home.
Yeah. And for you, I guess the reassurance that heaven will be a place where there is no more sickness or tears or separation from him or those we love. Yeah, no more tears,
Yeah,
sickness,
I mean,
separation.
there's a good, the Bible uses the following picture. Imagine you have a toddler, right, who runs off down the garden path and falls over and grazes their knee and comes back crying, right? What do? You get out a handkerchief, hopefully a clean one or a tissue. You wipe the toddler's eyes and you wipe the blood off the knee, and the toddler runs off happy. That is what God will do to his children in heaven. That's what being a Christian is, by the way. It's becoming a son or daughter of the living God because of Jesus Christ. And the Bible says this: God himself will wipe away every tear. Not angels doing it, or not, no doubt we may comfort each other, but God personally will wipe away every tear. There'll be no more crying, sorrow, or pain. The old order of things is passed away. So heaven will be amazing. Heaven is life. That's again the same offer. Choose life. Choose life. Why go away from God? There's a story, I don't have time to retell it. You can look it up. It's in Luke chapter 15 of the prodigal son. He suddenly realizes, oh, I'm in the pigsty. This is crazy. What am I doing in the pigsty? This is nuts. I must go home to my father. That's what being a Christian is. This is nuts. That there's a kind of insanity in rejecting God. It really doesn't make sense. Come home. And what does the prodigal son in the story need to do? He rehearses this argument as he comes along. I'm not worthy to be your son. Could I be a servant? And the father, God, sees him a long way off and runs and throws his arm around him and welcomes him home. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to try and be better. You just need to come home.
That's a wonderful picture. We've got a couple of other questions now. This is an interesting one. If God put his son, his beloved son, through all this suffering, does that mean that God gives suffering to his favorite children?
That's a very deep question. I'm not sure I can really answer that, to be honest, fully, because sometimes God gives suffering and you think, why? I don't, who can make sense of the Holocaust? But so there is some suffering which I just can't, I'm not God, I'm not equipped to comment on, but this I'm sure that God is capable of using suffering to bring great good. There are many examples of the Bible in that, and the best one is the cross. On the cross, the most perfect man that ever lived, the Son of God, divine, who came into the world to rescue us, wicked men nailed him to a cross and laughed at him and vilified him. That was the absolute triumph of evil, and yet out of that came the greatest good in the universe, because through that, death on the cross, a way is opened back. And that's so suffering can, and being a Christian does mean sometimes to suffer, because Jesus says, follow me, and we must in that sense also follow him to the cross. But the cross is not the end of the story. 3 days later, Jesus is back, right? So as Christians, we may well have to suffer. And I think very often when we suffer, we just can't make sense of it. And we won't make sense of it until a lady asked me in a recent one I did in this. She said, last year my 4-year-old son had died of leukemia. What would God say to me? And I thought, oh my goodness, what do I say? I don't even know who the person is, right? So being as Christians, we mustn't make glib, facile arguments. All I could say there is, well, God knows what it's like to lose his son, right? So suffering is mysterious, and God's purposes are beyond our understanding, but God can and does bring good out of evil, and the cross is the supreme example of that.
Oh, thank you. You shared that example then about the mother of a very ill son, and then you referred earlier to the story of Job and his friends who were not very helpful. I think all of us want to care for people when they're going through difficult times and suffering. Can you tell us things that you found helpful that people have said to you, and things that perhaps haven't been so helpful?
One thing that's be careful of kind of glib Bible verses. Romans 8:28 is not maybe the greatest Bible verse to say to someone who's just been
Just remind us
diagnosed
what
with
that says.
cancer.
What does Romans 8
God
say?
works all things together for good to them that love him. It's true, right? But there's a time and a place for everything. I think the most helpful thing that I get is I'm praying for you. Yeah, I love people to hear that.
Yeah.
And God hears everybody's prayers, as I said a few minutes ago. A friend of mine's, that's in the book actually, who's a convinced atheist, when I was first diagnosed with cancer, said, I gave God a surprise this morning. I popped into a church and said a prayer for you, which I was kind of touched by. So, yeah, it's a great question. How should we behave towards people who are suffering? And as Christians, we often get it wrong, by the way. That's why I keep saying it's not about Hillary or me or the vicar. It's about Christ. We're not pointing to ourselves, we're pointing to somebody else. So what should we be like as Christians? We should be like Jesus Christ. Well, what was he like with the suffering? Well, one day, again, you can look this up. It's in Luke chapter 7. He meets a grieving widow, and the body of her dead son is being carried off. And Jesus stands in the way, if you like, blocks the way to death. And he shows two qualities to this woman, one of which we must do, the other of which we haven't got, but we know someone who has got. The first quality is he's full of compassion and kindness. He's deeply moved. Literally in the Greek, it says he's gutted, right? So God, the supreme God, the God who made the universe, is moved by our human predicament. And he touches the dead body, which is something that no ordinary rabbi would do. So what must we be like with our friends who are suffering? Must be full of compassion and touch them, which is what we can't do in COVID, but metaphorically. Then the second thing he does is he raises the boy from the dead. Now we can't do that, and we have to be careful and not, as I said, glib and that God, may God have mercy on us. That's so easy to do, but just to, in deep love and kindness, say to people, look, we believe there is an answer to death. So, yeah, how should we be with people who are troubled? We should be like Jesus.
That compassion is really important, isn't it? And it's actually something that's so appealing about Christ, that he, like you said, was willing to touch the outsider, touch the weak and the outcast who others wouldn't have gone to, and he was moved. You know, he's not just a distant God who doesn't feel anything. He feels it deeply. I've got another question. Hi, Jeremy. Thanks for sharing your story. If you could go back in time to the moment where you were face to face with cancer, what advice would you give to yourself?
That's a really good question. I've been asked lots. I've never been asked that one before. Trust. Trust. There's a song I remember from when I was a kid in Sunday school. Trust and obey, but there's no other way to be happy in Jesus. So that, yeah, as Christians, what must we do? We must trust. However twisting and winding the road, and however dark the road, and the darker it is, the more we will feel the presence of someone beside us. So that's why I would go back and say, just trust. Yeah, and that's the biggest obstacle I think I find, that the lack of trust, which is doubt, right? And as Christians, even, we have that mixture of doubt and trust, and the two are, you know, being a Christian, as I keep saying, is not about eliminating doubt or just sailing through everything is great and wonderful. Yeah, it's fine if I die. No, we're human beings, same as anybody else. So trust. Yeah, I'd say, Jeremy, trust more.
And that's great. And you've reminded us tonight that it's not, you know, putting your faith in God is a big thing to do, but it's not a blind faith. It's not a massive leap in the dark, because, as you pointed us to, there are eyewitness accounts. There are people who can testify to what God has done, and we can see Jesus walking off the pages of the Bible. I've got an interesting question here, and it may be that the person who's asked this wants to follow up and come back, because there must be something behind this, I think. It says, many hospitals have a zero tolerance to swearing policy. As someone who's been given a diagnosis of cancer twice, how do you feel about staff who make a rigid application of this policy?
Yeah, that would sound to me like a very harsh thing to do. I mean, I didn't swear, I burst into tears, but I could have done. I've got to say, at the Marsden, the staff are amazing. Yeah, my oncologist, you can read about in the book, Robin, and the nurses, and it's a tough environment to work in. I mean, COVID is obviously very tough as well, but obviously with cancer, sadly, a lot of people don't get better. Yeah, that's a shame. That's a shame. Yeah, and if you come to church and you swear, That's okay. I don't know. I don't know about hospitals, but I do know about church. I don't particularly know your church, Hilary, but what should church be like? It should be like a nice, friendly hospital, right? You might think, well, hang on, a hospital? Yeah, because it's a place for sick people, right? Sick people, yeah. Yeah, you only go to church, you only go to Christ if you think you've got a problem, right? You think everything's fine, I don't need God. And I have the answer to death, which well, okay, fine.
A
But
lot
none
of
of us
people
have the answer.
Sorry to interrupt you. A lot of people do keep church at a distance sometimes because they think, oh, to be in church, I have to be somebody who's sorted and cleaned up my act. Yeah, what would you say to that?
Yeah, you see, when Jesus was alive, the religious people of his age deeply criticized him. So I don't know whether they were swearing, but they were certainly prostitutes and tax collectors. Nobody likes tax collectors. And by the way, your tax bill is overdue if you haven't filed it already. Right? And Jesus was with them, right? He welcomed them. He welcomed them, and he welcomes you. So come, and if your problem is, yeah, just come as you are, right? You don't need to pretend to be something. There's no point, right? If there is a God, he knows exactly what you're like, and he knows what we're all like. And the truth is, none of us deserve anything from God. No, none of us deserve anything. But God doesn't give us what we deserve. That's what Christians call mercy. Rather, he gives us something we don't deserve, which is grace, which is his son. So if you feel my hospital is so unkind, I'm really sorry for that person. I've never felt that in the Marsden at all, and my heart goes out to you. But well, I'm not a doctor, but I would say that the church should be a place where we welcome everybody and just come exactly as you are.
That's a brilliant picture of what church is, and we hope we provide that. One thing in your book that struck me was that you said that you really do trust your oncologist, Robin, I think his name is, who's stuck with you through both of your different types of cancer. That's right, you managed to persuade him to stick with you.
Yeah.
But you also talked about God as being a divine oncologist, which was an interesting phrase. I just wondered if you could just say a bit more about that to close.
Yeah, so by that I mean that, first of all, we have to realize there's a problem, right? Jesus said, I haven't come for the well, I've come for the sick. And the people in Jesus's time who thought, I'm fine, they didn't need God at all, and they rejected Jesus. It was the people like the tax collectors and the prostitutes who realized, yeah, I do have a problem, that heard him gladly and trusted in him. So by that I mean that there is a problem, and the basic human problem is the problem of evil, what the Bible calls sin. And God, if you like, looks at us and he can see that. He can see the tumors of sin, and he can heal us completely. Robin can't, sadly. He's done a great job. He's actually been promoted now to be a professor. I told him that was due to prolonging my life, and I was glad to be of service to the medical establishment. But God goes far beyond that, because he offers us a cure for our disease. And the disease, as I said, is the disease of sin. And the Bible says the wages of sin is death. And like the NHS, God is free, right? You don't have to pay. There's no pupa in the Christian life. You just come. You come with empty hands and say, yeah, I'd like some treatment. And again, that's the story of the prodigal son, right? The son who's in the pigsty in the oncology ward, the spiritual oncology ward, says, this is crazy. I must come back to the father. And the father embraces him. But there's another brother in the story, the older brother, who thinks, oh, I don't have a problem. I don't have any disease. I'm fine. And when the younger son comes back, he's very angry because he thinks God owes him one. He thinks I'm healthy. It would be like the older brother thinks like as if someone went into the Marsden and said, I'm just here for a visit. I don't have cancer. I just came to visit. They say, excuse me, leave, right? And the sad thing is that the older son, the older brother, ends up outside. The story ends on an ambiguous note. The younger brother, the one who realizes he's got the cancer, got the problem, needs to get back to God. He's in the house having a party, and the older brother, and there's certainly, maybe where you are is different, Hilary, I can tell you there's quite a few people like that in Sevenoaks, and I'm by nature one of them. They think, yeah, I never did anyone any harm. I'm basically a good person. I'll be fine with God. That person ends up outside.
That's a warning for us. But the one that God welcomes, he comes running to meet, doesn't he? And in spite of him rejecting everything about the father and expecting him to die so that he could get wanting him to die so he could get his inheritance. Pretty brutal. Thank you so much. I think we'll stop there. But just a few things as a reminder of what might be next for you. As I say, this may have brought up some difficult things for you tonight, or you might just want to talk to somebody do please get in touch with us, either contact us via the chat now privately on Grace Church Highlands, or go to our website. You can also, as we said, get hold of Jeremy's books, the Beyond the Big C, available to you free via the web link, and also you can access the other title, Hope in the Face of Suffering. We have many of these that we can post to you if you want to contact us and just give us your address, and we can easily put one of these in the post to you. If you would like to join us at Grace Church Highlands, from wherever you are in the country or the world even at the moment, because we're on Zoom for the time being, you're most welcome. We have our Sunday morning service at 10:30 online, and again, if you contact us, we can share the Zoom link with you, so that you can join in. We also have a YouTube channel which you can catch up on our services if you want to just see what we're about, see some of the different things that are going on, and we can arrange somebody for you to chat to you about one of the eyewitness accounts if you want to do that, or if you would like to perhaps join a discussion group with a few more people and look at some of this evidence for yourself. Perhaps you've never done that as a grown-up, perhaps you've only done that back as a child at school and feel it might be time now. Maybe you've been stirred by something that Jeremy's said this evening, so do follow up if you'd like to. Now's a great time in lockdown where we've all got a bit more time to think about these really important issues. We want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight, and a huge thank you to Jeremy. Perhaps we could have a few virtual claps to Jeremy, but we're so grateful, Jeremy, when you've given us your time, when I'm sure you're not feeling 100%, but we're really grateful to you for everything you've shared with us tonight, and for being willing to talk about all aspects of your own story and your own faith, and sharing with us the honesty of it, that there are times when you are fearful and have doubts, but that you have a firm and certain hope because of what God has done, not because of anything particularly to do with you. So we're so grateful to you for sharing all of that with us tonight. And thank you to those who've been working in the background, getting questions to me. And we hope we'll see you again. But good night from Grace Church Highlands. Thank you for joining us.